Hi, and welcome to Drafting Compliance. I'm Kane, he's Tom, and we talked about risk assessments last time. Today, we're talking about the planning domain under FedRAMP. But before we get to that, we have some beers. What are we drinking today, Tom?
We are actually drinking one of my favorite beers from Florida. This is High Lie.
Highlight
I think,
from Florida.
yep, High Lie.
Highlight from Florida.
Correct. From Cigar City Brewing.
Okay.
Down south, if I remember. I think it's around Tampa, maybe.
Remember, I'm in Washington
But,
State, so Florida is very much down south,
yeah.
yes.
So, for some folks, the name High Lie might sound familiar.
It's reminding me of an Archer episode where he got beamed in the head with a wooden ball. Is it that sport?
So your reference and my reference are different.
Okay.
I would have said it reminds me of the beginning of Miami Vice, where they show the people playing High Lie.
See, that was in Archer's Miami Vice mashup year. It was fun.
But either way, yes, that is correct. It's the helmeted field hockey looking game, but with hooked ball catchers or whatever. I'm sure they have a proper name, Kane. I don't know what the proper name is.
That's all right.
But this is an IPA, which I think anybody who follows the show knows that this is my favorite. And it also happens to be the most common type of beer these days in the craft brew industry. So
I will say
cool looking can too.
We do have Boulevard Brewing downtown, and they are really known for their IPAs. And anytime I walk by there, it smells like rancid sweat socks. That's kind of just the vibe.
Delicious.
Yeah, I know, and yet it's really popular. People go in and they enjoy the beer there. I have never enjoyed a beer there, weirdly.
I'm actually looking closely at the can for the first time, and it actually shows guys playing High Lie on the can. So I'm sure that won't translate at all.
Oh, yeah, I see it now. It's very subtle. Maybe we'll be able to get in post some kind of less shiny version of the can. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Either way, I'm going to crack this beer. The anticipation is killing me.
I do like that it comes in a smaller format. I feel like some of the ones, there's just, I'm spilling it. I can't talk and pour a beer today. I spilled it. Oh, wow. That's got an aroma.
And look at the wonderful amount of top on top of that beer. I mean,
isn't it called a head?
That's impressive,
Tom.
It's called a head.
Yeah, you said it was called a top. No, that's just confusing. You're messing with me.
Well, either way, it works. But it has really rich, creamy looking bubbles.
That's true, and it
which I like.
Kind of a citrus caramel scent.
I get the citrus for sure.
And definitely
today's not the best day for my nose, but yeah, I get a little banana.
I don't get
citrus.
Get the banana. I get the citrus, and the what are those things called? Hops. We've got a picture of one of those on the can. This has got hops in it.
You'll always get the hops out of this.
Goody.
Let's try a drink.
Okay, I'm waiting for my foam to calm down. I guess it's just not going to. So the first mouthful is just going to be foam.
That beer will come right through.
Yep, that's just foam. Yeah, but it's also going to end up like I'm going to end foam on my nose. I've had that happen. Yeah. Do you remember the old Peanuts cartoons where like Charlie Brown goes to kick the football and Lucy just yoinks it out at the end? Yep. This is pretty much that vibe. Like it smelled citrusy, and yet here I am kicking it at air. Or whatever the analogous High Lie would be. Not sure. Maybe missing the ball. This is
chucking the ball out of bounds or something. I don't know.
Yeah, this tastes like here's disappointment.
What I'll say. Oh, I disagree. This does have more caramely undertones than most IPAs that we've drank.
Yeah, that's true.
And you identified that on the nose. Mm-hmm. It isn't nearly as hop forward as many of the IPAs we've drank, which makes it much more approachable for folks that aren't super big fans of IPA, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I was just hoping this one would be a little calmer. Apparently it's not. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. That citrus isn't nearly as pronounced as it smells either.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping it would be citrusy. This is very
so in some regards, this has sort of a West Coast approach.
All right, so that's where
Anyway, I'm in danger of drinking it all because I'm enjoying it
and
immensely.
that's true.
Cameron.
This is one of your favorite beers, and here I am just saying it's basically terrible. I will
Oh,
think
I
about
don't
it
mind.
for
You've
a
said that
while.
about all of my favorite beers.
Now I've got to ask: was that cinnamon sticky bun ale though your favorite beer? Because I mean, it was
Yeah,
certainly
no,
not my favorite beer.
no. Yeah, we both decided that one could go away.
Perhaps favorite episode, but not favorite beer. Oh, dear me. Well, today we're supposed to be talking about FedRAMP. So, just at a high level, Tom, what is the planning domain under FedRAMP? Because when you and I first talked about this, you said, let's talk about planning. I thought we were going to talk about planning, not that there was a planning domain under FedRAMP, which to me just feels, well, I can be a pedant at times. What's going on with the planning domain?
Yeah, it does seem somewhat basic. I think if you're an information security professional who's heading up a maturity process in an organization, you're naturally doing a bunch of planning, right? So this is talking about something just slightly different. Really, it's broken into three kind of main pillars, but the main one, the one that people are going to walk away thinking about, is the SSP document.
Mm-hmm.
This is the family of controls that says, hey, you have to write everything down in what is called an SSP document, and FedRAMP gives you that format for the SSP document.
And just
So,
SSP, for those viewers who are not clocking, that's a system security plan.
correct. Yep. So that is the first and major pillar of this family of controls, but there's a couple others that I think are interesting. It requires a rules of behavior agreement between you and your user base that's basically interfacing with the system control boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And then it has a discussion which feels a little unrelated, but I think it is related around architecture. So those are the three main pillars. There's also some discussion around how you can tailor controls and things like that. But what you should really understand is this is all the work that is required to make sure that you have thought out your architecture, your security plan, and your execution and monitoring of that plan.
And FedRAMP has felt it necessary to tell people how to do that and how to actually do those planning exercises. So Tom, how do
Correct.
organizations actually incorporate this planning domain into their broader cybersecurity strategy under the FedRAMP framework?
Yeah, this is where I have some disagreement with how this family of controls is actually deployed, because it's really two pieces. It's a pre piece and it's a post piece. You can't get an SSP put together in the FedRAMP template until after you have everything implemented, because all of your details on how you implement go into the SSP,
Right.
right? So that's the after piece of this. But a big section of this family talks about what you do ahead of time. That's the architecture piece. That's why I really don't feel it fits in here. So you have to be careful, and you have to understand that before you ever even think about deploying a robust environment that's going to become FedRAMP moderate, you have an architectural piece sitting here tucked away in the planning that you have to go and solve for. So that's one of the real challenges, right? Is to understand that there's a big piece of this ahead of time, and then there's a big piece of this kind of right at the tail end that you have to pull together.
Yeah, and I want to talk about those challenges as well, because what other challenges are you seeing organizations facing when they're trying to meet the specific requirements in the planning domain?
Yeah, some of it is just the sheer abundance of fields that the federal government is asking you to fill out.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody has gone and looked at the SSP document, it's hundreds of pages,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's overwhelming, and lots of folks look at that document and they shy away from it right away. That is probably the single biggest barrier, in my opinion, past maybe cost, to implementing a FedRAMP moderate program. I see lots of folks that simply pause and never get back to the SSP document.
Mm-hmm. Anything else in there that's really unique in
No, I
planning?
mean, to me, the rest of this is pretty rote, right? I mean, I think anybody who's been in IT long enough understands architecture and understand what it means to build a security architecture. You put everything down on paper, make sure there's not holes and gaps, have it tested. I mean, that's architecture.
Right.
So that one's not hard, and certainly creating a rules of behavior approach to your system security plan. You already have a lot of this in your acceptable use
Right,
program,
right,
and
right,
maybe
right.
some of it in your code, maybe some of your code of conduct. So you're really pulling from those things and adding the prescriptive nature. So it's not particularly difficult.
Okay, so some of this
The
is going to
SSP
seem
is the
familiar,
lift.
with the exception of the SSP. And I was thinking about this earlier, and before the show, we were talking about this, Tom, about how the planning domain really aligns with other industry standards and other frameworks in cybersecurity. I was thinking about it like, the SSP is definitely unique, but some of those other things, thinking about architecture and having an acceptable use policy, those feel like they're aligned to other frameworks like ISO or, of course, the other NIST families.
Yeah, I would say you're going to be very comfortable in this if, of course, if you're familiar with NIST, right? This comes right from the pages of NIST.
Hmm.
The the sense of having a SSP, maybe CMMC, but there is not, I would say, a long tradition of this approach, and it really goes back to the idea that I think the folks at NIST understand that people forget to write things down.
Yes.
So this is forcing you to write things down, right? So I don't see. I mean, if you go and look at a lot of other frameworks, I don't see this requirement. Certainly not as prescriptive as we see in FedRAMP,
Hmm.
but certainly elements of it. And you touched on architecture of certainly shows up in other control families. So.
Definitely. All right. Well, if you're enjoying this conversation on YouTube, ring the bell to get notifications about my quest to find literally any beer that's drinkable, or subscribe to this in your podcast app of choice to make this show part of your routine. So, Tom, how does architecture in PL8, that's specific control, align with the other FedRAMP requirements that might address architecture?
Yeah, this is really interesting to me because one of the very first things anybody who's going through the FedRAMP process does is they create a boundary diagram,
Hmm.
which anybody who's done architecture would say that's an architectural diagram, and it certainly is. This is different. This is asking you to specifically address the security elements associated with what's in boundary. So you might have elements in that document. You're certainly not going to have them all. You're certainly not going to call out each and every call that's occurring between different applications and how it's encrypted and things like that. That's going to be part of your security architecture specifically.
Hmm.
And then what I think is interesting, if you went back and you referenced architecture in all of the families of controls, you're not going to see it show up anywhere nearly as prescriptive as it shows up in this family. And again, there's lots of families of controls where you'd expect it to. System and communications, for
Hmm.
instance, you would think, oh, they're going to call out architecture. Well, there's hints at it. There's calls to something that feels a little like architecture. This is the place where
It's really about writing it down
FedRAMP
and
is
making
saying,
sure you've got
yep,
everything documented adequately.
exactly. This is where FedRAMP is making sure you've written it down, and specifically from a security controls perspective.
Okay. All right. And so then thinking forward, like what strategies should organizations adopt to keep their SSP up to date? Because it's not good enough to just write it down once, right? How should organizations be keeping their SSP up to date and reflective of their current security posture?
Yeah, essentially, you should think about your SSP as part of your change control. So, in many organizations, change control is old hat, but certainly having a document like this size and this heft governing pieces of change control is different. If you're making changes that impact what you have written in your SSP, those have to get approved up through your agency generally. There's some exceptions, of course. I mean, if it's non-security impacting, if it's a bug fix and or vulnerability fix, you just have to track those in the POAM. But certainly, if you're making changes to how you have stated you've rolled out a control, that has to be updated in the SSP. The best place to do that is where it's agreed upon you're going to make those changes, right? And that's your change board, your change process. So that's the most effective way. You're probably going to look at this in a very formal way annually, either way. If you don't feel a high comfort level that you've captured everything, you certainly better. This is the strategy. The change control strategy is a strategy I would give you to say you can feel good annually that you haven't missed anything.
Yeah, and really just make sure it's up to date and you haven't, like you say, missed anything and writing it down. There's one, Tom, I know you wanted to talk about Control PL4, and can you set this one up for the viewers for what it's trying to accomplish and how organizations should be trying to meet that requirement? Again, PL4.
Sure. PL4 is the requirement for a rules of behavior
Hmm.
document. And a rules of behavior document is something that anybody who's accessing the security boundary has to sign in the organization. So that could be your employees, that could be a contractor if you have them. We don't. If you bring in third parties to help on something, maybe in your environment you have your own storage arrays and you brought in the vendor to help implement the storage array, but it happens to be within boundary. They would also have to sign the document. There's lots of pieces that, as I indicated earlier, Kane, that you're going to see in lots of your other documents that you've created in your environment. So code of conduct, for instance, acceptable use, for instance. So you can use that as inspiration or pull line items directly out of it. But there's some pieces also that you may not have in either of those documents that is required. For instance, it requires that you denote what is acceptable with social media. And it kind of makes a delineation here. Social media, external websites, and or applications.
Oh, okay, right.
What they're asking you to do here is understand that there is organizational information that every employee has, and they should know how and when they can share that information,
or not share that information,
or not share that information. So, a good rule of thumb is if you've already classified all the data in your organization, like we have. You can use that classification as guidance. So anything that in our world, anything you deem as public is shareable. But I like to put caveats around even that say, in general, we should be looking at how that data might impact an organization and look for if additional approvals are required. So, for instance, you want your marketing team to be able to absolutely shine a light on new and upcoming feature sets. But if those new and upcoming feature sets aren't approved through the change control process, are potentially going to hit pitfalls and be changed through, through your agency agreement. Well, maybe you don't want to share those yet. Another piece of this is you might have identifiers that are unique to just your security boundary, and you don't want to share those as well. This includes things like secrets, right? So if you have a password that you use in boundary, don't go and use it on your LinkedIn account as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking on marketing, like an organization that I was previously with in the defense industrial base. We had a photo policy, and if we had a photo of here's our team, look at us, we're people, we had to scrub the background so hard. We would try to get photos of the office adjacent workspace, and still stuff being left on whiteboards, stuff that was in frame for pre-production items, because there's some mechanical engineers who tended to be a bit loose about showing off what they were working on, had to scrub all of that out. And I imagine that would also
I'm
go
familiar
in there
with
too.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I built data centers for a living, right? So anytime we talked about doing a video walkthrough of a data center, we had to be very careful. We did not want to tip our hat on where cameras were, where the particular door controls were, because that was a big one.
Oh, definitely.
Certainly we didn't want to show where the main mechanical rooms and things like that were. So
yeah. All right, cool.
Familiar.
Well, let's get to our beer reviews, Tom, on High Lie. I think I went last time I went first. So how about you go first? Although this is your favorite, so I'm guessing you're going to give this a high review.
Yeah, this is absolutely one of my favorites. I've sat many times on an oceanside restaurant down in Florida and had one of these beers.
That sounds pleasant.
It is pleasant. It's a perfect sipper for when you're sitting on the dock or something similar. It is definitely an IPA, although I'm going to tell you it doesn't bite like some. So if you like IPAs, you'll probably love this beer. If you're looking for a beer that you can enjoy when you're in Florida, this is one of the biggest microbrews in the nation, but it's very popular down there. I love it. I think it's something that I often have in the fridge. So I'm going to give it an 8 because I'm always looking to be optimistic that something better will come along. But I think it's very good. Okay,
well, you're giving it an 8. So as usual, I tend to sniff these things after this, we're getting into the reviews, and it's calmed down on the citrus front quite a lot. It now just smells kind of malty, kind of caramelly, kind of hoppy. I always also take another sip, and yeah, it tastes kind of flat and sour. So yeah, it does not exactly lend itself to. You say this is good for sipping. I feel like this would be something that, at least in my environment, it does not aged well over the episode time, recording time. Having said that, it's also compared to some of the stuff we've had on here, I think you could always say we could do better. I've learned we could always do worse. Um, shout out to Cinnamon Bun Sticky Ale, forever in my nightmares. I'm going to give this a 4. This seems very
Oh,
generic, middle of the road, inoffensive adjacent, but also not
hmm,
something that I would. If I was in Florida at a seaside restaurant, I would not be drinking a beer. Actually, I'd probably have a gin and tonic or a good glass of wine. So at
excellent.
least we've come down. So you've got an 8 of 4. So between the two of us, actually, about halfway. Cool. Well,
Yeah.
that's all for today. If you think you know a beer that I'd like,
Doubtful.
good luck. Or if you have a FedRAMP question, drop it in the comments below. And remember to like our LinkedIn and YouTube pages to hear live interviews with information security professionals. Thanks, everyone.